It's been requested many times from a lot of people that I talk about the history of our farm. So today, I've got the legend with me. This is my dad, Nate. He's rarely been seen on the channel, and I don't know if you've ever talked to the camera yet.
I don't think I've ever talked to the camera on your channel. You know, I've been just in the background doing things once in a while and talking to you or Jim, and that's about it.
Well, here he is. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of our farm. So our farm was originally homesteaded during the Homestead Act in 1876, correct?
Right, yep. I think the 1/4, not where we're living right here, but the 1.5 mile to the south of us was homesteaded in 1876. And I don't know the details as good as I should or as good as I wished I knew them. But yeah, I do know that the 1/4 was homesteaded in 1876.
This, we believe, is the original family?
Right, yep. Anton and Matilda Johnson, I believe they came over from Sweden, or I know that they did. And then my grandfather would have been the youngest one there, John R. Johnson. Anton started the farm, and then Grandpa John R. took over from him. I believe probably in the mid-1930s or so. He was on the farm before that and grew up on the farm, but I believe it was in the mid-30s when he took over and he actually bought the farm. None of his older brothers or sisters really wanted to farm.
So he was the only sibling.
He was the only one out of 8 that stuck around and wanted to farm.
That seems weird in the early 1900s that only one sibling stuck around and farmed.
It really kind of does, yeah. Yep. Now, on my grandma's side, after he got married, she had 2 brothers that farmed fairly close to here. She was in a big family too. I had a large family, and she grew up on a farm.
They were down to the southwest, a few miles, correct?
Yep, about 3 miles, kind of southwest of here is where the 2 brothers farmed, and I think almost straight west, about 2 miles, is where my grandmother grew up on a farm.
They built the house, moved to this quarter of land,
right,
a half mile to the northwest, and built a new house.
Yep, they
in
built
1906.
In 1900 they built in. No, yeah, 1906 they built the house.
Yeah.
My grandfather was born in 1900.
There it is right there. That was the new house that they built in 1906. That's the house that I grew up in until I was 14. So
right, and at that time, the house, it was a brick house with a stone foundation. The foundation was kind of falling down. We looked at remodeling it. We had a couple people look at it, and they basically told us that it wasn't worth remodeling. So in 1998, we built a new house here on the farm.
Mm-hmm. So from about that time, early 1900s, your grandpa, my great-grandpa John R. comes in, starts farming, and then he had, how many kids did he have?
He had a son and a daughter, just 2 kids is all John R., my grandfather and grandmother had, just the 2 kids.
So one of those kids being Vertus?
Yep, Vertus was my dad.
It was your dad?
Yep.
And he passed away?
Yeah, now here I'm a little short on some of the details, but he started farming with my grandfather. And then I believe probably in 1956 he got married to my mother. And then I was born in 1958. And then I believe it was in December of 1960 is when he passed away.
From lymphoma, correct?
But Hodgkin's disease.
Hodgkin's disease?
Yep. So I was born here in this house that we just had up on the camera. Yep. I was born in that house, and then at 2 years old, my dad passed away. And then after that, Mom ended up moving to the cities and going to college. And from there, we ended up going to southern Minnesota. And in southern Minnesota, my mom remarried, and she remarried a farmer down there. So I grew up on a farm in Jackson, Minnesota, in southern Minnesota. And I did grow up on a farm.
So I've talked about the family connection to Jackson, Minnesota, but I've never really explained it. Both of my parents are actually from Jackson. So Dad was born here in this area, lived here for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years, yep.
Yep, and then ended up, his dad passed away, they moved south, and you grew up on another farm.
Right, yep.
But your family still owned it up here.
Yeah, my grandfather still owned this farm. He continued to farm it for, I believe, 2 or 3 years after my dad passed away and after we moved away. He continued to farm it and had help, and then he retired, and he rented it out to several different people after that.
So there's kind of we're a 5th generation farm right now, but kind of in between that 3rd and 4th generation, there's a half generation gap where our farm still, or our family still owned it, but they didn't farm it at the time.
Actually, from 1962 was the last that Vertus, my dad, and grandfather farmed it. And then I came back in 1982. I moved up here from Jackson.
So it was 20 years.
So there was a 20-year gap in there.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. When you farmed in Jackson, it was all row crop there, corn and soybeans mostly?
Well, when we first stood down there, they had a little bit of small grain, and they fed hogs and cattle when I was real young, and then they quit that probably when I was 6, 7 years old, or 8 years old.
They quit feeding hogs when you were that young?
Well, yeah, they quit farrowing, I guess. Actually, they did keep finishing hogs for quite a while. I kind of forgot about that. They had a finishing barn.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was mainly a row crop, corn and soybeans for them. And then when I got into FFA, about 15 years old, I needed an FFA project. So I decided to buy a few head of cattle and a few hogs. So I kind of started out down there with a little bit of my own livestock, but basically working with them. It was my stepdad. I actually call him my dad. He's the only dad I ever knew.
He's the only dad
he's
you
my
ever...
dad. He's your grandpa.
Right.
And he farmed with his brother, Kurt. And then Kurt had actually, well, he's got 5 kids. But at that time, it looked like there might be a couple of them getting into farming too, besides me. So there were a fair amount of people down there. But I was older than all my cousins down there. So I was kind of the first one starting on the farm. But I enjoyed livestock. I had hogs and cattle. And they also had several building sites where they bought the farms and they were just farming the land. And those building sites had old livestock setups on them. And so basically, they let me use some of their livestock setups. So I had hogs of my own. And then the cattle setup, we kind of went in partnership. We fed cattle then, and I did the work, and they provided the feedlots and stuff. We owned the cattle 50-50. They were half mine as long as I did all the work. And they owned half, and then they didn't have to do the work. Of course, they helped, and we used their equipment, some for chopping. And so basically, that's kind of how I got my start. I was 15 years old. I started out with livestock. I think I had 13 cattle the first time I bought, and probably bought 20 hogs. And hogs were way more profitable in the 70s than they are now. Yeah, we actually, I believe there were several years that I made $20 a pig on them.
In the 70s?
In the 70s, yeah.
Right.
When you start out the first year, you have 100 hogs, that's pretty good. Well, by the time I suppose I graduated from high school, and that's when we got a little bigger into livestock there. I think we were up to probably 400 or 500 head of cattle, and they had a finishing unit for hogs. So they had their own hogs in there, and then I had my hogs in all the other places in the outbuildings. But probably between us, we were a couple thousand head of hogs a year. And as I said, livestock was profitable in those years, so I was able to buy some equipment, mainly smaller livestock equipment, pretty much a full line of livestock equipment. Mm-hmm. And then down there were a fair amount of people. There were 5 of us at that time farming, and so I kind of decided maybe I would like to try it on my own. I talked to my grandfather up here, and then I got married.
Who was still your Grandpa John R. was still living up here.
He was still living in
farming.
This area. Yep, in town in Lowry, 3 miles away from here.
Yep.
And I talked to him and got married in 1981. And then in 1982, we decided to come up here and start farming. So we moved here. I actually did the fall tillage up here in 1981, living at Jackson. I drove up here and spent a few days at a time doing the tillage. And then we moved up here in March of 82 and lived in that house again, the house where I was born. And that's when we started farming here.
So you had a lot of machinery to get from Jackson up to here.
Yep.
I know I've heard some stories about pulling stuff all the way from down there, which is 180 miles?
Yeah, right at 180 miles to where the farm was south of Jackson to up here.
Yeah.
And we ended up pulling a lot of equipment. My dad and uncle down there also had an implement dealership in Esterville, Iowa. And at that time, the 80s weren't good, but in the late 70s or around 1980, 81, farming had already kind of gone downhill. And so I was able to buy a lot of used equipment from their equipment dealership down there. And we pulled a lot of it up here. I had a half-ton pickup. Should have had a little heavier pickup. But I'm guessing we made 30 trips probably back and forth
Was it the old silver pickup?
Yeah, silver 1981 pickup. I don't know if we have any pictures of it. It was a good pickup. It did a lot of work. And anyway, we were up here, and we were both, Zach's mom, my wife and I were from Jackson. So we ended up, missing home at a young age. So we'd go back to Jackson a lot of weekends, and we'd typically come up here Sunday afternoon, and we'd hook onto something and we'd pull it up here.
Every weekend, just go back and get a different implement.
Pretty much,
take stuff back and forth.
Yep, we had the tractors hauled up here, but then we'd go back, we'd pull a digger one week and pull the planter.
Grandpa and his brother were still farming down there.
Right, they still had the farming operation going and the implement dealership going down there.
Yep. And what did they sell at the implement dealership?
It was Massey Ferguson and White.
And White.
Yep.
Okay.
At that time they weren't together, it was two separate companies. Now it's AGCO, they're together, but at that time it was two individual companies.
And then you get into the 80s.
Yeah.
A little farther into the 80s. After the early 80s, you're up here, and you got everything moved up here, and you have a young family, 2 young kids. How did the 80s go?
Well, the 80s were a struggle for everybody.
Yep.
But, like I said, I moved up here. I had my livestock equipment. Some of that, we started out, we fed cattle here at first, and fed cattle till I believe 87, and we had hogs for a year or two after we had cattle. We never had them both at the same time.
We never did?
No, because we never had enough buildings up here.
Sure.
So we had the one barn is all.
This is where the cattle and hogs were.
Right. The
not in this building, but this
right
where we're standing used to be cattle and hog building.
Yeah. Yep. And I always enjoyed cattle, and there was a big investment with cattle, so it was actually almost safer, I figured, grain farming. And had an opportunity to rent a little more land, so we kind of quit the cattle. And hogs were cheaper, of course, to feed, so we had a few hogs, but not for too long.
How many hogs did you have in the building here?
Well, I think we kind of remodeled it and put cement panels up, so we could have about 400, and I don't think we ever had it completely full.
Okay. I remember the hogs pretty well. The cattle, I think I remember the cattle, but I remember running down the bunkers and trying to hit them in the nose when they were eating, but they were always quicker than me at the time. Yeah,
the first year we had to drive into feedlots to feed them, and then the next year we poured some cement and had cement fence line bunk, and that was really nice. I always enjoyed the cattle. I really liked feeding the cattle and enjoyed that. But it kind of got where we had so much going on, it was too much probably for one person. So we had about 300 cattle usually in the land, and so we just decided we'd quit the cattle and just farm the land.
Just farm the land. Do you regret that ever, or did you ever regret that?
No, I miss the cattle once in a while, but I really don't regret getting out of the cattle. I kind of had to concentrate on one thing, didn't have enough money to do both or expand and go with one or go with both of the operations, so we just concentrated on the grain and went with that, or corn and soybeans.
Sure. Do you have any stories from the 80s that people might find interesting?
Well, I don't know if there's any stories. It was tough for everybody. At the time, I thought it was a terrible time to start farming. Started in 82. We had a good crop in 82. And 83 was kind of a poor year for the whole United States. And up here we were close to average, a little below average. But in 83 the price came up, and the price wasn't too bad in 83. I actually think we had $8 soybeans in the fall of 83, for a little while. Yeah.
How were your soybeans?
I think we were a little over 30 that year. The first year we were in the upper 30s, 37 or 8. And we actually had some we hadn't sold till 83. So at that time, after 83 was over and we had the decent prices, I think a lot of people in the area, definitely including me, thought, well, the tough times on the farm are over.
Things are going to get better now.
Yep, things are going to get better, because 80, 81, 82 were not the best.
Mm-hmm.
And 82 was actually good up here for crops, but it was kind of going downhill. The 70s were really good, and it was going downhill. So everybody thought, well, the farm crisis or the poor farming economy is over, and people bought stuff again and started going, and really the poorer times had not started yet.
Mm-hmm.
In 1985 then, I had one field of barley. I'd never really grown small grain before, but I had 60-acre field. We planted the barley, and it was not a good year at all for barley. It ended up yielding 20 bushels to the acre, and the price had dropped. It was worth $1 a bushel. Now, we straight combined ours, so it was a little wet, so we didn't get the full $1. We got discounted, and we ended up selling that barley for 95 cents a bushel. At 20 bushels the acre. And that doesn't work very good when, at that time, sounds cheap now, but it was $45 an acre, and you get less than $20 gross. It was tough for everybody, and it stayed that way till about 1987. Things kind of got a little bit better.
That 20 bushel barley, is that the stuff that you combined when you had pneumonia?
Yeah, it was. Yep.
I think you told me the story where you went out one afternoon and you combined till late at night to get a hopper.
Well, actually, I think that was in 92 or 3 with the beans.
Oh, that was later.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had beans in 92 and 3. We were extremely wet. And we had 7-8 bushel the acre beans on several fields. We had a lot of fields that were in the 20s, but it was just way too wet that whole year. In 93, I believe, was the year they had the pick year. I can't remember all the details, but anyway, a lot of the corn in the area ended up getting destroyed, plowed under, or chopped. We harvested ours. We probably should have plowed it under. There was a government program to do that, and we didn't go in that. We ended up selling probably a third of it to a neighbor that combined it wet with the cob and put it in a silo to feed cattle. We fought a lot of it through the combine, through the dryer. I remember in 93, we finished combining about 2-3 days before my birthday, which is December 21st. And on my birthday, we were in the wet tank. It was a hopper bottom cone tank. We were in there chipping the corn out because it had gotten wet, and it would sit on the sides, and it was kind of a struggle in the fall of 92 or 3, but we'd kind of come back from the financial crisis of the 80s.
You were bouncing back a little bit at that time.
Right, yeah, yep. And actually, during the 80s, it felt like a terrible time to start farming. However, I think it was actually probably good. You know, I moved up here. I didn't really have much money. I had to compete with some of the neighbors that had full line of nice new equipment and seemed to be going really good. Yeah, they were well established. And I was trying to compete with them, and it was tough. But by about 1986 or 7, I had just as much money as they did. We were all broke.
Which was almost none.
Yeah, nobody had any money. Yep.
You've got a story about becoming a car salesman for a very short time span. Can you tell me that one?
I guess I was just going to try and have a part-time job.
Yeah.
And
because farming was no good.
Farming wasn't any good. So I looked into doing that, and I think I would have enjoyed it, but there just wasn't time. Then started doing that just for a little bit, and then we had a late spring, and all of a sudden the sun came out. Well, if you end up not planting your crop for 2 or 3 days, if you're busy working the off-farm job, it just was not going to work. So I believe at that time we had 800 acres we were trying to plant with an 8-row planter. And I think if I would have kept that job, it probably would not have worked. We wouldn't have gotten our work done. Mm-hmm. And it was tough anyway, getting the crops planted late. You really suffer in this area if the crop isn't planted on time. So
you could have cost your operation as much as what you may have made.
Right,
with the second job.
Yeah. Yep. If you don't get out there and then you get a rainy spell for a week and plant the corn a week later, you're going to lose a lot more than you would have gained having a job. I did have some winter jobs after that. You know, worked at ski resort for a little bit and drove snowmobile groomer and different things in the winter. I really enjoyed driving the snowmobile groomer.
That sounds like a terrible job to me.
It was slow and kind of boring.
And then you get to watch everybody zip past you on snowmobiles.
I didn't have to work weekends. Usually they tried to pull the groomers off on the weekends because the snowmobiles are pretty busy. So I could go out there and groom during the week, and then I would always know where the good trails were too.
I suppose that's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Yep.
Before we get too much later, let's talk a little bit about some of the older equipment that you had.
Okay,
I know you said Grandpa was a Massey dealer.
Right, Massey and White.
And White, yeah. So I've got some pictures here that I think people might find a little bit interesting. This picture here is you taking wheat.
Well,
that
actually,
wheat?
that's oats.
That's oats.
That was the first year I farmed. That was in 1982.
Okay.
And I planted 60 acres of oats, or 80 acres. I can't remember which. But yeah, this is the first combining I did with my own combine. Of course, I grew up in southern Minnesota driving the Massey combine for quite a few years.
Which weren't your machines, though.
Yeah, they weren't my machines.
Right.
So we moved up here and had this machine and started out doing oats first, and we had pretty decent crop of oats that year, and then I ended up baling all the straw. It didn't have any help, so we dumped it on the ground, came back with racks, picked it up, and stacked it in the barn that's right here. And then a fair amount of the straw we sold. Some of it we got cattle later that fall, so we kept a bunch of it for bedding for ourselves. But I think we sold probably 2/3 of the straws.
And then this picture here, what I think is so cool about it is that's our farm in the background there. This was taken south of here a half mile, kind of in between here and the original homesteaded quarter.
Right, yep, that's right, kind of right across the road from the original homesteaded quarter, and you can see our farm in the background, the way it looked.
You can see the silver galvanized shed there. That's the shed that stood, that's the hog building that we're standing in now.
Yep.
This picture here, this is the white. You actually had two of the same, they were both 135s, right?
Yeah, this is the first one we had. I got that down in Esterville, my dad's implement store, and hauled it up here. And that's the first tractor I had. That in the Minneapolis Moline that people see in the videos once in a while now.
Which we still have.
Both of those right away in the beginning. That's what I had the first year. So we did the tillage with this white tractor and planted with the Minneapolis Moline.
We got the picture here of you on the Moline. That's in the middle of the yard, the old crib, I guess we called it.
Yeah, there was a granary in the middle of the yard here. Yep.
Another picture of the white pulling the cultivator.
Yep.
At the time, I see some rocks in there.
It was a 1979 235 white.
79. Did you buy it new?
No, well, it was almost new. The store down in Esterville, Iowa, had rented that tractor out, and there were good programs on it. When I was starting out, I probably didn't need to buy it here. I shouldn't have probably bought the newer equipment. We don't buy new equipment now, but we did at that time. Yeah. But the dealerships had good programs, the manufacturers had great programs on it, and so it helped the dealership out. And actually the plan, when I bought both that tractor and that combine, we thought farming was going to turn around. And I was going to use them for a year or two, and they were going to go back to the store in Esterville, Iowa, and get sold as a demo a year or possibly 2 years old. And by then everything had gotten worse, and the price of new equipment had even dropped further, so that couldn't happen. So I kind of got stuck with a pretty new combine and tractor right when I shouldn't have.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people, from what I hear, a lot of people got stuck in those situations at that time.
It was tough for everybody, yeah. Yep. Anybody that had any newer equipment, the value just kind of crashed. Mm-hmm. And it had already kind of crashed when I got this equipment. Like that combine, I had probably actually paid a little over half price what that would have been 2 years before that. Because the manufacturer came with a 20% discount to the dealers. So I got it at 20% less than dealer's cost, and it didn't work out. Mm-hmm.